Today we are back with another episode of the Wilmington Spotlight, and I have Jayne and Valerie. And can you guys tell us a little bit more about what you do and where you work?
Sure. Valerie Gingrich. I'm the Director of Planning and Conservation for the town. And we work in the town hall, and we look at all of the new development projects that are coming in to the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. And we do a lot of rezoning, and we do a lot of open space planning, and various other things. But those are our main focuses, I guess.
It's important work.
Yes, thank you.
A lot to it.
And this is Jayne.
I'm Jayne Wierzbicki, and I am the Town Planner and Economic Development Coordinator. So basically most of that minus Conservation Commission. But I still pay attention to conservation things.
That's awesome. There's a lot there. And thank you both for doing all that. Those are heavy jobs. Lots to them. You guys are getting new offices soon, though, I've heard. So that'll be good coming up. One thing I did notice, so I had actually saw during the town meeting, you guys have presented a zoning, it looked like law, it was about the MBTA. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and what that entails and what's going on with this? Just to give us a general idea to get started, basically.
Yeah, sure. So in 2021, Governor Baker signed a new law. We call it Section 3A. It's the MBTA Communities Law. And it requires towns to create zoning districts that allow multifamily housing, so apartments or condos, without special permits. So you can basically come in and build those multifamily housing developments in certain sections of town. Each town has a size and a unit number that they have to achieve with the zoning. So it's something that we have to comply with by the end of this year.
Okay.
And it's not that we have to build any housing. It's just that we have to create the zoning that allows the potential for someone to build multifamily, so apartments or condos.
Right, and I obviously assume by us having this conversation and show that we are considered one of the MBTA communities. What makes us one of those communities?
So there are 177 communities, I think, and I think it's a list of communities that have MBTA service, but it goes a little bit beyond that because it's not just communities that have stations; it's adjacent communities. So it's defined in a statute, I think, but we're definitely one of those. We have 2 commuter rail stops, so
we're actually one of the big MBTA communities, definitely, right? How do they? So basically, I know you just touched on it, but you basically said that every town that's in the MBTA community has a certain size and a zone that they have to create. Now, is this based on how much MBTA service we have, or is this all preordained in some sort of state law? Like, how does that all work?
So it's based on categories to start. So we're a commuter rail category. So there's other categories like rapid transit or adjacent communities that don't even have a stop, like North Reading. They still have to do this. And it's based on your overall household number, and it's a percentage of that you have to add to the community. So So there is a formula, but then they also have, they have another formula for saying how much of the zoning has to be close to the train station. So for us, 50% of our district has to be within a half mile of the train station.
Okay.
The other half of it can be anywhere we want.
In Wilmington, as long as it's in the borders of town.
Right, exactly.
You have to basically zone these areas out, but you did mention that doesn't necessarily mean things have to be built or anything of that nature. Now, is there a requirement, like, is it just multis and condos, or is there like a low income requirement that is associated with this? Like, is there certain like numbers of those things that we need to reach in a quota over time?
No. So really, there's no requirement for any of the housing to be affordable.
Okay.
So it's not an affordable housing push. It's just a housing push. So this is full price market rate housing. We're allowed to require 10% of it be affordable.
Right.
And then since we have a 15% requirement in our other zoning already,
right,
we're actually making the argument to the state that we should have a 15% of it be affordable, but we have to show that it's economically feasible. to be able to do
Okay.
that. So we're in the process of having that study done, and we're going to try for that 15% affordable. But you don't have to have an affordable component.
Okay, so you had mentioned that condos and multis, is that really, what are like the actual requirements on the housing? Is that the focus? Is that they just have to be in previous zones where those might not necessarily have occurred? They don't need to pull permits is really the only difference on that?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple things, right? So that you have to allow for the potential of it without any, basically you get a building permit for it.
Right.
You're allowed to do site plan review with the planning board, so we're going to require that. It's typical for all development in town. But it's not discretionary, right? So a special permit, if you had a special permit requirement, which our multifamily currently does, the board that gives that permit could say no. In this case, they can't say no. It's allowed. You can do it. It's just, how does your parking layout and those things. So
they basically just don't have to pull permits, but it's all about the condos and multis. So let's say I'm a builder and I come in there and I want to build on a plot of land. The difference really is about pulling permits. And whereas if I wasn't in the zone previously, I'd have to go up against basically, or not against, but in front of town hall, a certain committee and get and maybe an exception or things of that nature. But with this zone, it would free me of that type of regulation because they want to promote these multi-units and condos in that area?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And you said 50% within the T itself, the areas of operation we have in town. Now, you said there are adjacent communities that have that, so we have to follow that because we actually have the T in town. And can this be both the north and the south stations, like both stations in town? It can be near either one, basically?
Yes, it can be. That's right.
Okay. And you guys said you were doing some feasibility studies and things like that on the low-income aspects of this, but this had already gone in front of the town meeting and stuff of that nature. So you guys have already definitely had some maps built and drawn on this stuff, right? This is already public knowledge.
Yes.
Right? Because I've seen some really great presentations. They're beautiful, by the way. Lots of work put into that. Now, how do those studies happen? Like, who decides to draw the lines, and how are they drawn? Basically, within the 50% marker, and then outside of that area, like, I'm sure there is some serious professional work put into this behind it, some research done and things of that nature.
Oh yes, yeah. Jayne and I have spent a lot of hours on this, and early on, it's been a couple years now that we've been working on this.
Wow.
But, yeah, we did a survey. I can't remember when. But at pretty much the beginning of the process, we did a survey to get some input on exactly that, like which train station are we focusing on, right? And what other areas. So we wanted to target areas where we've already done multifamily and kind of take credit for it, right?
Yeah.
So we looked at those types of areas and we put it all on an online survey, and we got a bunch of feedback on which area to focus on, and also, how people felt about height, 3 stories versus more or less. And so we got a lot of really good feedback, and that feedback told us that the Main Street station was a little bit more popular than North Wilmington.
Right.
And so that's where we decided to focus. But we had a lot of other challenges with all of this because we have a groundwater protection district in town.
Yeah.
We had to avoid that completely.
Okay.
There's floodplain district. We had to avoid that completely.
Okay.
So all of our kind of areas got narrowed down a bit. And luckily we found a stretch of Main Street that qualified.
Okay.
And then outside of the half mile, the most popular option was the area on West Street, just south of Lowell Street, where we have some existing multifamily housing.
I was going to say that. So a lot of our existing multifamilies in town, that's really easier to categorize in the outside of the 50% zones because they already exist, and we can get credit based on that and just basically say that's part of our other 50% that's away from the T zones and stuff.
Yes, but they had rules for that,
If
right?
they weren't in the water, well, is it just the water conservation areas and the floodplains? So there's more. So there's a lot that excludes and includes.
Yeah,
right.
so it has to be, the district has to be at least 5 acres.
Now, like gerrymandering, like, are you allowed to basically draw like any shape as long as it connects in those 5 acres, or do you?
Well,
have to kind of make them squarish, like,
So
you know.
we try to follow parcel lines with zoning
Right.
because otherwise it gets so complicated, right? So we looked at, well, that's why that West Street stretch there where we have some multifamily, it wasn't in any of those districts, and we could kind of take credit for that over there. But yeah, there were other criteria that we had to meet with those districts with sizing, and they had to be contiguous, and so we really kind of focused on the West Street area, that stretch of Main Street, and the metro development at the train station, and then Deming Way, our senior housing.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can get into that.
Yeah,
into
so one of the questions I have, let's play both sides of the tape because I'm curious to know, but I'm actually going to ask afterwards what the demeanor is around town with it. But let's play both sides. So let's say we're one for it. How quickly does this get executed? What happens? Is this all ready to go right now? And then basically the other side of the fence, what if we just don't comply whatsoever?
Great question.
You know? So let's start with the side that I guess, let's say we voted in, we're all for it. How soon does things like this get executed? Mm-hmm. What is involved with that process, and what does that look like?
Sure. So, I don't know, Jane, help me out here with a couple examples of parcels. Well, we always use House of Pizza, right? So for some reason, we use House of Pizza as an example. But let's say the town meeting votes this, approves it in the fall. So then after that vote, it has to go through the state. It has to go through the AG's office. But the town meeting vote is the important part of it. And at that point, an owner of a piece of land has just basically another option, right? So the owner of House of Pizza, they could keep everything the way it is right now. Mm-hmm. Since it's zoned general business, right? They could knock down the House of Pizza and put up a 3-story commercial building, like an office, and they can do that today. With this new option, they could knock down the House of Pizza and they could put in condos or apartments.
Okay.
And the way that we have this zoning written is that we want to encourage active uses on Main Street. So you could either do 2 stories of apartments or condos, or you can do 3 stories with basically a commercial use on the bottom floor, like House of Pizza. Put it back in,
split use, right? Yeah.
And then have your apartments or condos on the 2 stories above it.
Okay.
So you would but all of this is just options for landowners. No one's telling them that they have to do anything. And we structured it as an overlay district, so everything stays the same. It's just another option added on top of what you can already do.
Just because we're here, and this is the perfect moment to ask this, have things similar to this been implemented in other cities and towns in Massachusetts, and have they seen what the effect is on that? Do developers immediately move in like vultures and just start buying up all these parcels because now all of a sudden maybe, let's say, the House of Pizza values up into a very different sphere of where it was prior to, although you did say that was already an option for most of these places. Well,
it's already an option to do a 3-story building. You can't do housing, but you could do like a 3-story something else, like a commercial use.
Okay.
There are communities, I don't know what the number is now, but a lot of communities have approved the zoning. And I haven't heard stories about, rushes on things. I think that development, no matter what, it takes a little bit of time, right? So that landowner has to decide whether they want to do something different with their property, whether they want to sell it, and all of those things, decisions like that, and process, that process takes time. So we're not seeing immediate turnover, and especially with, existing buildings that are maybe making money, like an existing apartment building. Where you can now do apartment buildings, you're not going to knock down the one that's there to build the same thing back. So I don't think it's an immediate change.
Right.
Over time, yes, probably. Some of those parcels on Main Street, like, they may turn over into different uses for sure.
Okay, while we're on this, I live in North Wilmington. Let's say I get zoned into the other 50% district or things of that nature. I own a house and I want to basically make it into a two-family. That's the difference in my personal use of a house, but then I would have to go and change my entire house and all that, of course. But that's kind of not the commercial sense, the more residential sense. Like, same idea. I get to kind of do what I want with my lot in a different sphere up in the north, if I'm in the zone technically.
So we have targeted, for the zones, we have targeted only commercial areas, basically. So no single-family homes. There might be one on West Street.
Just one.
But we did not
Legitimately one home?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're changing the neighborhoods upside down.
No. So we knew that, everybody loves their neighborhoods, right? So, so we were looking at it more as let's look at commercial areas and existing multifamily areas.
Okay.
And focus on them so that we're not going into neighborhoods. We're looking at, places that can already be a 3-story commercial building.
Right.
So you're not going to see neighborhood changes.
And so the incentive for the state and the MBTA behind this is basically to put more housing within access of the MBTA.
That's the general idea.
Right, which is why the 50% requirement's on the closer to the stations as to opposed to anywhere on our spotted map we decide. But just like you just said, one single-family house is on the west area that you talked about. This isn't going to change the inter-neighborhoods up in like the north or anywhere around town. And I think these are generally some of the fears that when people hear this stuff, they're like, oh, my neighborhood's about to flip upside down. And it's like, wait a second, let's look to see where these zones are being built. And like you said, you touched on already existing multi-commercial with a focus, right? So that kind of generally covers the side of what would happen if we were to go ahead and pass. Now, what happens if we completely ignore this and just don't even consider it and say, no, thanks?
Right. Well, first, the Wilmington Housing Authority would lose a part of its funding.
Okay.
And they're already, they already have funding
issues.
Struggles. So that's one thing that happens immediately. We lose eligibility for a list of grants.
Really?
So for instance, we got a grant, I think it was almost $4 million to redo the culvert by Eli's, right?
Okay.
So that culvert and then the extension of the sewer system, we got a MassWorks grant in conjunction with the Princeton Properties Development. That's going to happen right there. So we got a state grant for almost $4 million to redo the culvert and do the sewer line. That type of grant would no longer be available for us.
And those are the unseen grants, but expensive. When you talk development, especially in economic sense, a lot happens underground that no one sees. And that's, if the state's going to pick up that tab, it's a beautiful thing.
Right.
However, with that being said, this doesn't seem like it has anything to do, some of these grants, with the MBTA area itself at all. This is just in general, there might be grants that we're ineligible for?
That's right. There's a list that they have, but they've also said that, I don't know if you've heard about what Milton isn't complying, and their deadline was last year. So they're out of compliance, and the state is suing them. And so I think the arguments start in October on that. But they lost a grant was taken back that the state gave them that wasn't even on the list. So
really?
So it was like a seawall grant or something. So it's grants that are important for our infrastructure. Like the town applied for an MVP grant. It's a municipal vulnerability preparedness. It's like almost like a
disaster
storm.
response.
Yeah, kind of. Climate change, disaster type things. We applied for a design and permitting grant for a culvert, Martinsbrook culvert, over on your way to Benevento on 62. That culvert has to be replaced. Like, it's not an option. It has to be replaced. Right. So we applied for, I think it was $350,000 of money. That was just a month or two ago that we applied, so we'll hear about that soon. That grant program's on the list. If we get the design money, we have a good chance of actually getting construction money too, which is in the millions range.
Right.
And that would be really helpful. That's a millions of dollars that the taxpayers don't have to pay, and
Right.
we could get in grant money. So it's important things like that we would be ineligible for, or penalized and not at the top of the list type of thing.
Now, we used one to build the high school, and I think we're applying for a new one to redo some of the other schools and stuff. Are those grants also at risk and stuff of that nature?
So I don't know.
Okay.
So far, I've asked that question.
Right.
And actually asked the woman who runs the Section 3A, the MBTA Communities kind of effort at the state, and she said that they're trying to figure out a more detailed list of grants that would be impacted. But what I'm hearing is that probably not, but
Right.
we just don't know.
Right.
So it's a little open-ended.
Which can be scary when you're talking about all the
Yep.
different grants we apply for and things of that nature.
Right, even transportation improvement grants, right? So MassDOT, we've heard that they're having conversations about whether, transportation improvements will be impacted, the funding for that. So,
All right, so that's kind of both sides of that fence right there. So then what are we actually getting? What's the feelings we're getting from the town so far? Like, what is the public kind of – let's start with, I guess, the public and say what are you guys getting for feedback? How do you feel the public's receiving this? And then also let's talk about how some of the government committees, like let's say the finance committee and things like that, are they very pro, like this is a no-brainer, like who's what and how are things being looked at in an honest light around town? Like, let's start with the population. Like, is this generally getting positive feedback, or is there just a lot of questions on it? What's happening?
you have to jump in here, Jayne, but my sense is that, well, and even I feel this way, no one likes to be told what to do, right? So especially when it's your local community, and zoning is very local, right? So we get to do this locally. We get to kind of plan how things are going to go. And so this was something that was just kind of put on to towns. So there's a lot of discomfort with that.
Of course.
Nobody likes that.
No, it's very, overpowering Big Brother type feeling, right? Of course.
Yes. So I think that's the general sentiment, that they wish that, we didn't have to comply.
So that could be the general sentiment, but it sounds like you two, especially when you did a lot of this research up front, let's say me as a North Wilmington single-family home owner, you thought about that. You realized that I might have some sort of an issue if all of a sudden you tell me my whole street's going to get torn down into multis and things, because it could affect my property value or just, the home I basically originally picked and things like that. But you mentioned one single family is included in these zones that you guys have pre-drawn. Mm-hmm. That obviously still have to go up to the state and the AG, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. But this was done, even though it was kind of almost forced, like you said, you definitely took into account a lot of what you could assume would be our concerns with this as taxpayers and citizens.
Yeah, and the planning board, so the planning board was tasked with kind of being our, guide on trying to figure this out. And, those 5 residents of the community, none of them loved the requirement.
Right.
But their task was to sort of, with us, come up with the zoning that made the most sense and had the least amount of negative impact that we could possibly do. Right. So that's why we looked at taking credit for our existing multifamily.
Right.
And, focusing on areas where, it's not adjacent to single family homes. Right. So we're not going into those neighborhoods. So yeah, a lot of thought was put into that.
Now let's talk about that right there, because basically this wasn't like the state said, hey, we have this new 3A zoning law we want to put into effect, and then somebody down at the town hall is like, all right, you two handle this, let us know how this goes. There was an oversight committee who was the planning board, and there were actual residents involved in this. So as far as committees, like for instance, the finance committee that knows a lot more about the grants that go behind the scenes, or that zoning committee, this was all done in unison with them. They've looked at this type of stuff already and had input, if you would.
Yeah, so we definitely went to the select board a few times, giving updates on these, on our progress. We did have conversations. The planning board discussions were during planning board meetings. I think you're right. I think the finance committee has concerns about losing grant money,
Right.
And substantial grant money that we like to take advantage of. I think we all have concerns about that.
Right.
And yeah, so we had some information sessions. We went to the senior center a few times. There's a men's breakfast there that I talked at, and I think we went for hot chocolate. We went a few times. We had hot chocolate at the library. That's what it was. So we've kind of been around. We were at the Wilmington night at the 4th of July.
Right.
We made cotton candy. I think we got pretty good at it. And just, there to answer questions, and because it's quite a topic. There's layers to it, right? So it's not easy to explain in a quick soundbite.
Right. Absolutely not. And this has become, now that we've opened up some of these, like, way more understandable. Now, this fell on your department. This isn't actually something that was proactively pulled out by anybody. This was like, this is going to happen in all MBTA communities. And they were like, all right, your department's going to handle this with a little oversight from, the select board, also the planning committee and things of that nature. And, taking into account a lot of the different opinions around town about, like, hey, I don't want to rezone my personal neighborhood and things like that. This was all thought about and very much considered during this planning process.
Yes. And
who drew the plans by out of curiosity? Is there a professional company that was hired, or did they literally just look at maps and start, drawing?
No, this was a team effort with Jayne and Tony, our GIS manager.
Okay.
The three of us really, there's a monster of a spreadsheet that the state gave us to kind of spit out the numbers that you need to get to. So we dove into that. We talked to the planning board about different areas. We did the survey. We did it all ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lots of work.
It was a lot of work, but yet it's also a lot of work to manage a consultant that isn't as familiar with town.
Right.
Right. So
may not have the concerns of us and other individuals around. Right.
We know the little tidbits that somebody from elsewhere isn't going to quite know as detailed. So we didn't end up hiring anyone. We do have someone working on the economic feasibility analysis for the affordable piece of it. And actually, we got a grant through the state to do that work. So we're not paying for that work, but we did it. Yeah, we did it in house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so to be very clear, this was told to be done by the state, the MBTA laws and things like that, but the MBTA and the state did not come in and start drawing maps and telling us what we needed to do. They very much gave Wilmington its own control on these aspects of the different planning,
Yes.
and the future of what we're going to do with it all.
Yeah.
What are some of the strong negatives that people are hearing, or why do you think it got tabled during the town meeting? Was it just because more information was needed? I think it wasn't voted down. It wasn't voted for. I think a lot of that would probably be as a concerned taxpayer is like, wait, what's happening? What's going on here? But now that you've told me different aspects of this, I tend not to choose sides, especially on the show and things like that. But as like a taxpayer in the North who has a single family home in a residential neighborhood, like I'm not as concerned as I was prior to this show, because I don't really know the full scope of this. What do you think some of the sentiment is around town? I mean, you guys have definitely said town night, hot chocolate at the library. So you've been doing your work to get information out. Well, let's stop right there and start right there. Where is it? Is this all online somewhere?
We have Jayne has been keeping a web page on the town's website. If you go to Planning and Conservation, we have an MBTA Communities Section 3A page. And you can see some of, Jayne, what's on there?
It's like everything up to date, all the information we put out, information flyers, poster boards that we bring to, like the community night, any info sessions, things like that. The PowerPoint that Valerie presented at town meeting is up there.
Right.
And I think I want to add some more stuff just to keep it, informational and helpful for anyone who doesn't really know everything around this.
Right. I mean, instinctively, a lot of times, states coming in and telling us to do something, that's a no. That's just not going to happen. But part of this, I think, one of the things that I've realized just in this short conversation is there's an immense amount of information involved with this. There's an immense amount of work behind this. This wasn't something that happened overnight. It looks like the law was passed in 21, and 3 years later, we're just getting it in front of the town meeting. So let's get into so basically one of the things I guess would be as a taxpayer, so let's say that, the town decided, okay, maybe this isn't, the worst idea. Maybe this is something that we could get behind and support. Well, what if some of the zones we wanted to adjust or something like that? How does that play in? Once we do this, is this all finalized, set in stone now that, I hear it and it doesn't sound like a threat to my neighborhood or anything like that? Okay, well, let me ask you this. So let's say it gets passed. We do this. It's not going to all of a sudden turn around and be like, oh, wait, but we are going to actually change one little aspect of the resi area and stuff. These are going to be I guess the plans that we're going to submit to the state and AG and things of that nature.
Right. So the idea would be, so the feedback we got at town meeting, I think it was why don't we wait and see if anything changes, right?
On the state level.
Yes. So, or with Milton in that lawsuit, there's some things. I think there were some proposed amendments to the law that were kicking around at the time. So I think the sentiment was, let's just see if something changes and put it off for now.
Okay.
But the other feedback we got was what we were proposing as the district was probably, the best we could come up with, right? So we didn't get a lot of feedback on, oh, why don't you change, this over here, move this little, so that was good to hear because, going forward into a fall town meeting to vote on this, it should be familiar to people, right? So we're not making any last minute, line changes or anything like that. So once that's approved, that would be the thing that we're submitting to the state for compliance. Okay. With all zoning, you can always change it by vote of town meeting. I imagine, I don't know that they've anticipated people the long-term, kind of upkeep of this, but you can always change your zoning. I think you would just have to show that you're still compliant with the requirements. So let's say we voted in and 2 years down the road, we want to make an adjustment.
Right.
We'd be okay to do that.
Could do that.
I think we just have to, submit to get approval that we're compliant again from the state. So,
right. And if it's Armageddon and all this, we can also pull back and not be compliant in the future. This isn't a set in stone zoning law code forever for Wilmington.
Zoning can always change.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we've mentioned Milton a couple times. Mm-hmm. It seems like, with 177 communities, is that the only community we're really hearing about that's gone into the I'm not going to do this sphere?
That's the only community. So rapid transit communities had a deadline of this last year. That's the only rapid transit community that has not adopted zoning. So they're really out of compliance.
So rapid transit is in buses, trains, but not commuter trains and things. We're commuter.
Right.
We're not the colored lines.
Right.
And the buses. Those are all rapid transit areas. And out of that group, you've got one that's kind of holding out.
Yep.
We've seen some repercussions to them on this.
Definitely. But us commuter rail communities, our deadline is the end of this year. Okay. So even if they voted no at town meeting, they're not going to be out of compliance until the end of the year when their deadline hits, because you can always hold another town meeting and have another vote. Right. So there's not going to be trouble for them until that deadline passes at the end of the year. And same for us. We have until the end of the year to comply. Same as those other communities.
And now we saw the delay to see if things would happen with Milton. Let's say the lawsuit, things. Are we seeing changes at the state level? Are we seeing any developments in the Milton situation? Have we had any updates? Is the governor's office still supporting this? Is all this still going forward?
Still going forward, and a lot more communities have voted for it than against it.
Okay.
So I can't remember what the number is. I should have looked it up, but a surprising amount of communities have approved zoning and a small number have voted no. But
Okay.
again, they could change that, right?
That's not on the rapid transit group.
Right.
This group that we're coming with, that it expires the end of this year, there's been a little bit more no's than just Milton in that group.
Right, a handful, yeah.
Now, is that a popular thing amongst the adjacent towns? Like in North Reading, for instance, that has no T whatsoever in it. I could see where they'd be a little bit less, like this doesn't make any sense, but we do have the 2 commuter rails. Are we seeing a lot of towns much like ours, like kind of doing that?
Do you remember what North Reading did?
I don't think they've had it yet.
They put it off?
Yeah.
I think Rockport voted no. Like, it's kind of like
Sporadic,
spread
different.
around.
Yeah.
Tewksbury voted no.
Tewksbury did? Okay.
Yep, Wakefield.
Okay, yeah, that's right. There are some others, but it's not a long list. And, you know, they can, like I said, they can hold a fall town meeting to try to turn that around and make it a yes.
Right.
But there are kind of I know Reading hasn't voted on it yet. Burlington passed it.
Mm-hmm.
Woburn hasn't voted on it yet, I don't think.
Right. They had to change it.
So we've got a mix.
Out of curiosity, just because, let's say we get to the fall, we haven't seen a lot of changes on the state level, not a lot of changes with the lawsuit that Milton's in and involved in. What if we decide, all right, like some of this does make sense, but some of it doesn't? Like, for instance, like the low income aspect, or let's say that it's not a multi area that we want in certain areas. At that point, is there a back and forth, or is this pretty much like you vote for this a yes, or you vote for this a no, and there's not a lot of adjusting and things of that nature? Like, how does that all work?
Well, once something gets to town meeting, it's hard to change it at town meeting, right? So that would be probably a yes or a no. And if it's, I guess, if it's a no, we'd like to gather as much information on like how it could be better, right? So, you know, it can always be adjusted and there can be other votes. But I think that once it gets to town meeting, because the complicated thing with this is that we have to make that spreadsheet spit out the right number. So if we change a line slightly or change a number, you know, or change a height, it messes up the entire calculation. So we have to hit a number of, I think ours is 1248. So 1,248 units is what we're supposed to be zoning to allow. So that spreadsheet has to equal 1,248. And if we change something at town meeting, we can't just kind of, you know, see if that's going to make the spreadsheet equal 1,248. But I should say that the 1,248, I know that number scares people, and it's kind of overwhelming. It's a fake number. Right, so if I can give an example, this is hard to explain. So do you know Regency Place on West Street? It's an apartment development. It's down the street towards Industrial Way. Anyway, there's an existing, 3-story rental development there. That's in our West Street district. The spreadsheet says that you can build a lot more units on that parcel than you can actually build, because the spreadsheet is using GIS maps from the state. Those maps don't necessarily show every inch of wetland. It doesn't show a stream that's running through that property. So the maps and the spreadsheet say that you could build, I don't remember what the exact number is, but let's say you could build 300 units there. Okay. Well, the full build out of that property is, what is it? It's just over 100, and it's fully built out.
So the 1248 number would have to be every single parcel tearing down and building to the max capacity.
Yes.
So the 1248 is probably not going to happen.
That's right.
Okay.
For a lot of reasons, right? Because not everything, is someone going to tear down the storage facility on West Street and
they just built.
That they just built not so long ago and makes probably pretty good money, right?
Right.
They're not going to tear that down just to build something else, at least not in the short term, for probably decades, right? So
if we saw half that number creep up, then all of a sudden we could go back to the zoning table and be like, wait a second, we are seeing this 1248 number all of a sudden come to fruition like we never thought possible.
There's no way.
There isn't.
There's no way.
Because
There's
of other
absolutely no way.
reasons like wetlands,
Wetlands,
zoning.
infrastructure, right? Some of those areas don't have access to sewer, right?
Okay.
So we did focus on places that should have mostly access to sewer, just because that's the way it kind of just shook out. But they don't account for all the wetlands. They don't account for high groundwater. They do,
Right.
those pieces aren't in there. So that 1248, the spreadsheet might say it, but there is no way that number of units get built.
Let's say the 1248 scares me as a homeowner and things of that nature. Now, we said once it gets to the town meeting, it's really an on and off switch. At that point, we're there. We have to vote on what's at hand. So I know that there's the website that Jayne did great work on with a lot of information on it. Where is a concerned citizen? Are there meetings in between? Are there planning board discussions? What do you guys, like, where does this all happen? Does it happen behind closed doors and you guys are going to show up at town meeting? Or are there things between now and the fall that will take place that, as a citizen, I could actually see or get involved in?
So we are going to be appearing at some different events. We're going to plan some things at the senior center. But what I would really encourage, because this is such a layered topic,
Right.
Call, stop by
Stop by the town hall.
our office. We're happy to talk about it anytime.
Right.
Call, stop by, send an email, and we can talk about it, because it's we will have events and we'll be around, but it's really kind of easier to talk one-on-one about it, because
Right.
it's because of the depth of the topic.
Now, like I said before, not whether or not I'm for it or against it, one thing I have noticed, you're both very responsive. That is something that you actually will stand behind. I could actually shoot an email and believe I will get a response from this group. I could stop by the town hall and walk through these offices like I do to Brett at the rec all the time, or you guys, and or the tax bills and all that stuff, and actually ask these questions. Just recently, even with the I think it was, we were trying to get a couch. We called Casella. They were just like, yeah, we don't do that. And then I called town hall and they were like, no, we absolutely do. We'll call them. Very responsive group down there. It's not like, you just get like, there's just all locked doors and please don't come back until the end of the summer. So I will say, like, whether or not for or against it, you guys are very responsive as a team, which is very helpful. And really, if we want to be heard, that's our method of, hey, we want to email you, we want to call, drop by. This concerns us for XYZ, which is very reasonable. Like I said, walking in here, I had some fears as a homeowner in North Wilmington. I was like, is everything getting rezoned where I live? What's happening? But, I really want to reiterate the one single-family home that seems to be in this zoning changes, and most being commercial or already existing multis. That's not exactly what I thought when I first heard the 1248. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
and those
yeah.
maps are on Jayne has the maps on the website. It's good to take a look at those and see it for yourself and
Right.
kind of see those areas for sure.
We also try to keep up with social media too.
Right.
We post about any events we're having through the town hall, social media in general. We try to post on X now, which was Twitter,
Right.
Instagram, Facebook. We're not as active on there, but we do try to post as much as possible.
This is great. This is all good to know. Like you said, years of work that went into this. So unfortunately, whether it gets passed or not, thank you. Because regardless, somebody had to do all this work, which isn't easy. And that's one of the things we focus on in this show. No matter what it is you feel about it, there's a ton of work that goes behind closed doors onto these things. And then we'll definitely try to have you guys back on different topics that involve like the wetlands and the economic planning committees and things like that, because this is just one aspect of your department, which is incredible too. That's the other side of this is it's not like you guys just wake up and all you do all day is the MBTA zoning laws and things like that. And that's where I met Jayne prior to this with other things. So thank you as a town, resident. It's one thing I do appreciate because somebody's got to do this and I don't want to.
We're happy to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And we really do appreciate you guys coming on today. Like, I definitely have much more of an understanding about this. We'll be able to talk about this in different settings. Whereas before, I really felt too ignorant to talk about it. Really, I didn't have a set idea set behind it. one of the things I don't do is side on shows like with this stuff, but like, understanding it a little bit better, there are some misnomers that I definitely had walking in here. My neighborhood was going to be flipped upside down, things of that nature. I'm really glad I asked these questions because a lot of that stuff's been really evident that it's not going to be exactly what I thought of in my head. The big bad state coming in and flipping this upside down and what are you guys doing in Wilmington? I just bought here 5 years, 6 years, and even the townies, you hear that, But again, thank you guys both for coming on. So much behind this, years of process and planning. We'll definitely keep an eye on it, and we'll have to come visit, and we'll have you back on later on. So
That sounds great.
Sounds good.
thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Jayne. And that just
having
about
us.
wraps it. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.